Across the vast lands of the Mongolian steppe, the wind moved through tall grass like waves rolling across the sea. The sky seemed endless, stretching far beyond the hills and plains. On clear days, the blue sky felt so wide that it made people feel small beneath it. This was the homeland of the Mongol tribes. There were no large cities or stone roads here, only open land and moving camps. Families lived in round tents, called gers, that could be packed up and moved whenever the tribe needed new land for their animals. Life on the steppe was simple, but it was not easy. The winters were bitter and cold, and the summers could be dry and harsh. Strong winds swept across the plains, and storms sometimes appeared without warning. People depended on their animals to survive. Horses, sheep, goats, and cattle were the center of daily life. Horses in particular were the pride of the steppe. A good rider could travel great distances and hunt food for the family. Among one of these traveling families, a boy was born around the year 1162. His name was Temujin. At the time, no one believed that this small child would one day become a name remembered across the world. Years later, Temujin would be known as Genghis Khan, the man who united many tribes of the steppe and built a powerful empire. But during his early life, he was simply another boy growing up in a hard land. Temujin's father was Yesugei, a respected warrior and the leader of a small Mongol clan. Yesugei was known for his skill on horseback and his bravery in battle. Temujin's mother, Holan, was strong and wise. She had once been taken from another tribe and brought into Yesugei's family. Life had taught her how to survive difficult times. The family lived together in their gyr, a warm round tent made from wooden frames and thick felt. In the center of the tent burned a fire that gave heat during the cold nights. Even as a young child, Temujin watched everything around him. He saw the way warriors rode across the plains and how elders spoke about rival tribes. Without realizing it, he was already learning the ways of the steppe. At night, when the wind blew softly outside, the elders told stories. They spoke of great warriors, brave hunts, and the struggles between tribes. Temujin listened closely, his mind filling with images of adventure and danger. These early years were peaceful compared to what would come later. The young boy played with his brothers and sisters and helped with small tasks around the camp. But life on the steppe could change quickly. A single event could shift the fate of an entire family. Soon, Temujin would face the first hardship that would shape the rest of his life. As Temujin grew older, he began to learn the skills every child of the steppe needed to survive. Life in the Mongol camps required strength, patience, and courage. One of the first skills he learned was how to ride a horse. Children were often placed on horseback at a very young age. Riding was not just a skill, it was part of everyday life. Temujin practiced riding across the wide grasslands with other boys from the clan. They raced their horses across small hills and tried to show who was the fastest rider. He also began learning how to shoot arrows with a bow. Even young children were trained to hunt and defend themselves. Temujin spent hours practicing his aim. The steppe itself became his classroom. He learned how to follow tracks in the dirt, how to watch the weather, and how to find water in dry land. Although these lessons were part of daily life, the steppe was not always peaceful. Many tribes lived across the plains, and not all of them trusted each other. Old grudges between clans could last for generations. Sometimes small disputes over animals or land turned into violent fights between warriors. Temujin often watched his father meet with other tribal leaders. Some meetings were friendly and ended with shared food and laughter. Other meetings were tense. Warriors sat quietly with their hands near their weapons while leaders spoke carefully. Even as a young boy, Temujin began to understand that power on the steppe depended on loyalty and strength. Despite these dangers, many days were calm and beautiful. The sun would rise slowly over the grasslands, and the camp would wake to the sounds of animals and moving wind. Temujin helped gather animals, watched over the herds, and listened to the stories of the elders. During quiet evenings, the sky filled with stars brighter than any city sky. Around the fire, people spoke about the past and about the future of the tribe. But before long, a journey taken by Temujin and his father would begin a chain of events that would change everything. When Temujin was about 9 years old, his father decided it was time to follow an old tradition of the steppe. Boys often had their future marriages arranged at a young age. Marriage between families helped build alliances between tribes. These connections were important for peace and protection. So one morning, Yasuge placed Temujin on a horse and began a long ride across the open plains. They traveled for several days, crossing wide valleys and rolling hills. Along the way, they passed small camps and herds of animals moving slowly across the grasslands. Eventually, they reached the home of a young girl named Berta. Her family welcomed the travelers and offered them food and shelter. After speaking together, the two families agreed that Temujin and Berta would marry when they were older. For the moment, Temujin would stay with Berta's family to strengthen the bond between the two clans. Leaving his son behind was part of the custom. Soon after the agreement was made, Yasuge began the long journey back toward his own camp. As he rode across the plains, he met travelers from another tribe. Following steppe tradition, they shared food and drink together. But these men recognized Yasuge. Their tribe had once fought against his, and old grudges remained. Quietly, they placed poison into his drink. Yasuge did not realize what had been done. After leaving the travelers, he continued riding across the steppe. But before long, he began to feel sick. The poison slowly weakened him as he struggled to make it home. By the time he reached his camp, his strength was fading. His family gathered around him as he fought to stay alive. Far away with Berta's family, Temujin had no idea that tragedy had struck. Soon he would learn that his father was gone, and the life he once knew would never return. Temujin returned to his camp after visiting Berta's family and found the place empty and quiet. The news hit him like a cold wind. His father, Yasuge, was dead. Poison had stolen the man who had led their clan, protected them and kept them together. For a young boy of 9, the world suddenly felt enormous and frightening. Without Yasuge, his family had no clear leader, and rival tribes were no longer held at bay. The steppe, which had once been a playground, now seemed full of dangers he barely understood. Temujin's mother, Holin, took control immediately. She was strong and determined, but there were several children and only one mother to protect them all. She organized the camp, made sure the younger children were fed, and decided where they would move next. Every choice mattered. One mistake could lead to starvation, exposure, or attack. Temujin watched her and understood that survival depended on courage, intelligence, and quick thinking. The other families in their clan began to drift away. Some joined stronger tribes, seeking protection that Temujin's family could no longer provide. The small camp felt emptier with each passing day. Temujin and his siblings learned to rely entirely on their mother. She taught them the basics of survival: how to care for the animals, how to find water, and how to make simple weapons to protect themselves. Hunting became crucial. Temujin practiced riding long distances on horseback, learning to follow tracks and move quietly across the grasslands. Every animal caught meant food for the family. Every failure meant hunger. The boy began to understand patience and endurance in ways few children ever do. The steppe was unforgiving, but it was also a place of lessons for those who paid attention. Temujin also began noticing how people behaved under stress. Tribes that once seemed friendly became suspicious. Men watched each other closely, wary of betrayal. He learned to read expressions, words, and subtle movements. Loyalty could not be assumed. It had to be earned. Evenings were often quiet, with only the wind moving across the grasslands. The family huddled together around small fires, eating what they could find or catch. Temujin thought about the future, wondering how he could grow strong enough to protect his family as his father had. The steppe taught him lessons no story could. Every day was a mix of fear, survival, and growing skill. He learned quickly to handle responsibility, understanding that the safety of his younger siblings sometimes depended on his actions. He began to plan, to notice opportunities, and to make decisions that mattered. By the end of the first year without his father, Temujin had changed. The boy who had once played freely now measured the land, watched for danger, and carried a sense of responsibility far beyond his years. He was learning courage, patience, and the importance of leadership. Temujin's family traveled constantly across the steppe, moving in search of grass, water, and safety. Each day brought new challenges. The animals needed care, food was limited, and rival tribes watched their every move. Temujin learned to observe the land carefully, where the grass was thick, where water could be found, and where danger might hide. Each detail mattered for survival. Without his father, Temujin began taking on more responsibility. He helped herd the animals, repaired parts of the tents, and learned to make quick decisions. Houlun guided him, teaching him not only skills, but also wisdom about human behavior. He learned that not everyone could be trusted, that respect had to be earned, and that alliances were fragile. Hunting became more important than ever. Temujin learned to ride long distances, track animals carefully, and use a bow with precision. Success meant feeding the family. Failure meant hunger. Over time, his skill grew, and he became one of the most capable hunters in the camp. The boy also began noticing patterns among rival tribes. Some men relied on strength alone, but others used clever strategies and deception. Temujin realized that intelligence and observation could often achieve what brute force could not. He learned to judge situations, anticipate danger, and plan his actions carefully. Winter brought additional hardship. Cold winds swept across the steppe, snow covered the grass, and water froze in the streams. Temujin learned to conserve energy, protect the animals, and endure the harsh climate. These experiences hardened his body and mind, preparing him for even greater challenges. Despite these dangers, Temujin's mother remained a source of guidance and hope. She taught him leadership, strategy, and patience. Each day he watched her navigate threats, organize the family, and keep them alive. Her strength inspired him to act bravely and thoughtfully. As he grew into his teenage years, Temujin became known for his courage and skill. Neighbors noticed his ability to ride, hunt, and think quickly. Though young, he began to gain respect, showing hints of the leadership that would later define him. Evenings were often reflective. Temujin would sit by the fire, thinking about survival, strategy, and the future. He imagined one day gathering people under a single banner, stronger than any one tribe. Though these thoughts were dreams for now, they laid the groundwork for ambition and vision. The lessons of hardship were shaping him. He understood that fear could be controlled, that loyalty was precious, and that strength came in many forms. He realized that leadership required more than courage. It required wisdom, observation, and endurance. By the end of this period, Temujin was no longer simply a boy surviving hardship. He had become a strategist in the making, learning skills and lessons that would carry him to greatness on the steppe. Life on the steppe continued to test Temujin. Rival clans, harsh weather, and scarce resources forced him to grow stronger and wiser. Each day brought challenges, and each challenge taught him something new about leadership, strategy, and survival. Houlun remained the family's guiding force. She encouraged Temujin to take initiative, make decisions, and protect his siblings. With each task, he learned how to lead, even if only in small ways. Mistakes were punished by hunger, exhaustion, or risk, and successes meant security and respect. Temujin also learned the importance of observation. He noticed the subtle behaviors of neighboring tribes, watching for alliances, threats, and opportunities. He realized that understanding people was as crucial as being strong on horseback. The boy spent long hours hunting across the grasslands. He tracked herds, studied animal behavior, and became an expert rider. Each success in the hunt meant food for the family. Each failure was a lesson in patience and adaptation. Life was never predictable. Storms could destroy camps, wolves threatened animals, and hostile tribes could attack without warning. Temujin learned to remain alert, to plan ahead, and to react quickly when danger appeared. Despite these challenges, he began earning recognition. Neighbors and other tribesmen noticed his courage, intelligence, and skill. Though still young, he became a figure of quiet respect, someone others observed closely. By the time Temujin reached his later teens, he had already mastered many survival skills. He could ride long distances, hunt efficiently, and make strategic decisions. His mother's guidance and the hardships they endured had shaped him into a capable young leader. Temujin also began thinking about power and unity. He watched the struggles and alliances of other clans and imagined how scattered tribes could be brought together under one strong leader. These thoughts were seeds for the ambitions that would later define his life. Evenings were a time for reflection. Sitting by the fire, listening to the wind and observing the stars, Temujin thought about strategy, loyalty, and the kind of leader he wanted to become. He understood that survival was only the first step. Leadership required vision. By the end of this chapter of his life, Temujin had transformed from a boy into a young man ready to face the steppe with courage, intelligence, and determination. Every hardship, every challenge, and every lesson had built the foundation of the future Genghis Khan. After the long winters and harsh travels, Temujin had grown stronger and wiser. The loss of his father, Yesuge, still weighed on him, but he had learned to survive and adapt. His mother, Hoylun, continued guiding the family with quiet determination, showing him how to lead and protect his siblings. The boy was no longer just surviving, he was observing, learning, and planning. Life on the steppe was never predictable. Some days were calm, with the wind rolling softly across endless grass, and other days brought storms, cold, and danger. Temujin had learned to ride long hours, hunt carefully, and anticipate trouble before it arrived. Every trip across the plains was a test of skill, endurance, and awareness. The neighboring clans began to notice Temujin. Even as a teenager, he displayed courage, intelligence, and a sharp sense of strategy. He watched their movements, learned their alliances, and noted where weaknesses appeared. On the steppe, power often depended on knowledge, and Temujin was beginning to accumulate it. Rival tribes were still a constant threat. Some tried to intimidate Temujin's family, testing how much they could get away with. Others simply observed from afar, unsure if the young boy could survive the dangers of the plains. Temujin learned quickly to respond appropriately, fight when necessary, retreat when wise, and negotiate when possible. Hunting became more than survival. It was training. He tracked deer and wild horses for hours, learning patience, precision, and timing. His riding skills grew sharper, his aim with the bow steadier, and his endurance unmatched for someone his age. Each success brought food and confidence. Each failure taught humility and adaptability. Temujin also began to understand leadership in a new way. Strength alone could not hold people together. Loyalty, respect, and careful planning were just as important. He watched how different clans treated their people and how leaders maintained control. Slowly he began imagining the kind of leader he wanted to become, one who could unite and inspire. Evenings were filled with reflection. The wind blew across the camp, and Temujin would sit with his mother, listening to stories of the past and lessons for the future. She taught him that patience and observation were as crucial as courage and strength. Every day was a school, and Temujin absorbed every lesson he could. The steppe was teaching him resilience. Hunger, cold, threats, and betrayal hardened his mind and body. He learned that fear could be controlled and that survival required constant awareness. Every challenge was a building block for his future. By the end of this phase, Temujin had changed. The boy who once played freely on the grasslands was now a young strategist, observing, learning, and preparing. He understood the importance of alliances, strategy, and leadership, even before he had the men or power to act on them. As Temujin entered his later teenage years, he began testing his skills and instincts further. He traveled farther across the steppe than most young men dared, observing neighboring clans and noting how they organized themselves. He studied the strengths and weaknesses of leaders, learned patterns of movement in armies, and understood how disputes could be turned to advantage. Knowledge became as important as courage. Hoylun continued to guide him, but now she allowed him to make decisions independently. He learned to organize small hunts, assign tasks to his younger siblings, and manage resources. Responsibility came early for Temujin, and he embraced it fully. Mistakes could be dangerous, but success brought confidence and trust from his family. Temujin began forming small alliances with other boys and young men from nearby families. These early friendships taught him loyalty, negotiation, and trust. Even small agreements mattered on the steppe, and every connection could become important later. He realized that people's loyalty could not be assumed, but had to be nurtured carefully. Hunting trips now doubled as lessons in strategy. Temujin studied the terrain, anticipated animal behavior, and planned routes that minimized risk while maximizing results. He became skilled at reading the land, noticing subtle signs like tracks, broken grass, and wind direction. These skills would later serve him in battles and campaigns. Rival clans remained a constant presence. Some tried to steal animals, challenge the family, or test Temujin's courage. Each encounter became a lesson. He learned when to fight, when to retreat, and when to negotiate. Observation and timing were as important as any weapon. During cold winters, the family huddled together for warmth, sharing stories, rations, and hope. Temujin saw firsthand how leadership and courage could inspire others. Holan's strength gave him a model to follow, and he realized that true leadership combined wisdom, patience, and decisiveness. Temujin's reputation began to grow. Neighbors whispered about his skill with horses and weapons, his cleverness in observing threats, and his ability to survive hardships that would have broken others. Though still young, he was becoming a figure others watched carefully. Evenings were moments of reflection. Temujin thought about strategy, alliances, and the future. He began imagining uniting scattered clans under one strong leader. This vision, though distant, began to shape his actions and decisions. Every hardship he faced, hunger, cold, rival threats, made him stronger. His mind and body were being forged for leadership, preparing him for the challenges ahead. He understood that survival was just the first step. Influence and unity were the ultimate goal. By the end of this phase, Temujin was no longer simply a survivor. He was a young strategist, a learner of the land and its people. Temujin's years on the steppe taught him the true meaning of leadership. Power did not come from strength alone. It came from loyalty, intelligence, courage, and the ability to inspire others. Every journey, hunt, and encounter added to his understanding of people and the world. His mother, Holan, remained a central figure, guiding him with wisdom and experience. She taught him negotiation, strategy, and how to command respect without force. Temujin absorbed these lessons eagerly, recognizing their value for the challenges to come. Hunting became a crucial part of his training. He learned to ride long distances, track animals with precision, and work alongside others to ensure success. Each trip built stamina, skill, and patience. Hunting trips doubled as preparation for leadership, teaching him planning, timing, and coordination. Temujin also began observing the relationships between tribes. Alliances shifted constantly, rivalries flared, and betrayals were common. He noticed which leaders were respected and which relied solely on fear. He realized that loyalty had to be earned and maintained through careful management and fair treatment. Rival clans occasionally challenged the family. Temujin learned to react quickly, assessing threats and opportunities. He began forming small groups of allies, practicing leadership on a miniature scale. Even small decisions carried consequences, but they taught him how to weigh risks and rewards. Seasons changed, and Temujin adapted. Harsh winters, storms, and scarce resources tested his endurance. He learned to ration food, care for animals, and maintain energy. These lessons hardened his body and mind, preparing him for the challenges that lay ahead. By the end of his teenage years, Temujin had become a respected figure. Neighbors and other tribesmen noticed his intelligence, courage, and leadership potential. Though still young, he inspired trust and admiration in those around him. Evenings were reflective. He often sat by the fire, thinking about survival, strategy, and the vision of uniting tribes under a single banner. He began planning how to bring people together, seeing possibilities that others overlooked. Every hardship, every challenge, and every lesson strengthened him. Temujin understood that leadership required more than strength. It required foresight, patience, and the ability to read people and the land. By the end of this chapter, the boy who had lost his father was now a young man, prepared for the trials and triumphs that would define his life as Genghis Khan. His vision of power and unity had begun to take root, and the steppe had shaped him into someone ready to rise. Temujin was no longer just a survivor. He had grown into a young man of skill, courage, and intelligence. Life on the steppe had shaped him, teaching lessons most boys his age would never know. He understood the importance of loyalty, observation, and strategy. The hardships he faced after his father Yasuge's death had forged him into someone ready to take responsibility. Holun, his mother, continued guiding him, but she allowed him more independence. He began making decisions about the family's movements, hunting strategies, and safety. Each choice carried risk, but every success brought him confidence and trust. The steppe had become his classroom, and he was now the teacher of his own destiny. Temujin began gathering small groups of allies. Boys and young men from nearby families noticed his skills and judgment, and slowly a following began to form. These early alliances were fragile but crucial. They taught him the value of loyalty and trust, and he learned how to inspire people even without formal authority. Hunting trips became exercises in leadership. Temujin organized small groups, assigned tasks, and planned routes across the grasslands. He learned to anticipate danger, to keep his team safe, and to make quick decisions under pressure. Every day was preparation for future challenges. Rival clans continued to challenge his family. Some attempted thefts or intimidation, testing the young leader's skills. Temujin learned when to fight, when to retreat, and when to negotiate. He began understanding that true leadership required both courage and wisdom. Through observation, he also learned about the weaknesses of others. Some leaders ruled with fear, others with greed. Temujin realized that respect was more powerful than intimidation. This knowledge would become a cornerstone of his future strategies. Evenings were reflective. Around the fire, Temujin considered the alliances he could form, the threats he could anticipate, and the ways he could protect his family. Every challenge he faced added experience and foresight. The steppe itself continued to teach him lessons. Tracking animals, reading the wind, and observing the movements of people gave him a unique understanding of the world. Knowledge became a weapon, just as important as a bow or sword. By the end of this period, Temujin was no longer just a boy reacting to circumstances. He had begun to shape his environment, to lead others, and to imagine the possibility of uniting scattered clans under a single vision. This first step toward leadership marked a turning point in his life. Temujin was preparing for battles, alliances, and strategies that would eventually define him as Genghis Khan. As Temujin's reputation grew, he began to understand the delicate balance between loyalty and fear. His small group of allies depended on him, and he had to prove himself through actions, not words. Leadership on the steppe required constant attention. Every decision could affect lives, animals, and alliances. Mistakes were costly, but successes inspired confidence. Temujin began taking on challenges that others avoided. He rode long distances alone, scouting the movements of rival clans. He observed their strengths, weaknesses, and patterns. Every detail mattered. By understanding people and the land, he could make decisions others could not. Hunting became a test of endurance, skill, and strategy. He coordinated small groups, set ambushes for animals, and ensured that food returned to the camp. These exercises taught him how to manage resources, assign responsibilities, and maintain morale, skills he would later use with entire armies. The steppe was harsh, but it also offered opportunities. Temujin noticed disputes between neighboring clans and used these moments to learn negotiation and alliance building. He realized that small gestures of trust could lead to lasting loyalty. Even the smallest connections could one day become a foundation for a larger power. Conflict was never far away. Rival clans sometimes tried to take advantage of his youth or smaller following. Temujin learned quickly to assess threats, prepare defenses, and act decisively. Observation and intelligence often gave him an edge over brute force. He also began to understand the importance of character in leadership. People respected those who kept promises, acted fairly, and displayed courage. He observed leaders who ruled poorly and noted the consequences. Temujin internalized these lessons, shaping the way he wanted to lead. Evenings remained a time for reflection. Sitting by the fire, he thought about loyalty, strategy, and the long-term goals that would one day unite tribes. He began to imagine a future where scattered groups could follow a single leader, him. By now, Temujin's leadership extended beyond simple survival. His vision included protection, respect, and unity. He was learning to balance the needs of his followers with the realities of the harsh steppe. Through all this, the young leader continued to grow in skill, wisdom, and courage. He was preparing to face greater trials, knowing that the foundation he built now would determine his future. The boy who had survived loss and hardship was transforming into a young man ready to command attention, inspire loyalty, and shape the destiny of the Mongol tribes. Temujin's years on the steppe were teaching him that leadership was about more than survival. It was about vision. He observed other clans, learning which methods worked and which led to collapse. He noticed that strength alone was not enough. Respect, foresight, and fairness created lasting authority. Small alliances became his practice ground. He carefully nurtured trust among his followers, balancing rewards, responsibilities, and discipline. Even minor victories built credibility, and Temujin learned the value of timing in both action and speech. Hunting trips were more than survival exercises. They were lessons in coordination, planning, and leadership under pressure. Temujin learned to manage small teams, anticipate problems, and respond to unexpected challenges. Each success built confidence, each failure taught humility. Rival clans occasionally threatened his growing influence. Temujin learned to act decisively, choosing battles carefully. Sometimes retreat was necessary, other times negotiation was the wisest path. Strategy became as important as courage, and patience often outweighed haste. The steppe itself remained a teacher. Winds, clouds, animal behavior, and patterns of movement all offered insight. Temujin learned to read the land and the people, understanding how each could affect his goals. Knowledge became a crucial weapon, and observation became second nature. Through observation, he also noticed weaknesses in leaders who ruled by fear. People respected leaders who combined fairness with strength. Temujin began shaping his style around this principle, understanding that lasting authority required balance. By his late teens, Temujin had become a figure of growing influence. Neighbors and other clansmen recognized his intelligence, courage, and leadership potential. Though still young, he inspired loyalty and respect among his followers. Evenings offered reflection. Around the fire, Temujin thought about alliances, strategy, and the long-term vision of uniting the steppe. He realized that true leadership was not about domination, but about inspiring people to follow willingly. Every hardship, every battle, and every lesson reinforced his emerging skills. He understood the importance of preparation, foresight, and understanding human nature. Leadership was more than power. It was responsibility and vision. By the end of this chapter, Temujin had become a young man capable of leadership, skilled in survival, and beginning to carry the ambitions that would one day make him Genghis Khan. His journey from boyhood loss to early leadership had set the stage for the remarkable rise to come. After uniting the Mongol tribes and defeating several powerful rivals, Genghis Khan began turning his attention beyond the Mongolian steppe. His empire was growing rapidly, and controlling trade routes across Asia became one of his most important goals. Trade meant wealth, and wealth meant strength for the Mongol state. To the west of the Mongol lands stood the powerful Khwarezmian Empire. This empire controlled major cities along the Silk Road and ruled over large parts of Central Asia. Instead of attacking immediately, Genghis Khan first attempted diplomacy and trade with its ruler. The Mongol leader sent a large caravan of merchants and envoys toward the Khwarezmian territories. These traders carried valuable goods such as silk, furs, and precious metals. Their mission was simple: establish trade between the Mongols and the wealthy cities of Central Asia. The caravan eventually reached the city of Otrar, an important trading hub within the Khwarezmian Empire. However, the governor of the city grew suspicious of the merchants. He believed they might actually be spies sent by the Mongols. Acting on this suspicion, the governor ordered the caravan arrested. The merchants were accused of espionage, their goods were seized, and most of them were executed. The decision shocked many people. but the governor believed he was protecting his empire. News of the event soon reached the Khwarezmian ruler, Shah Muhammad II. Instead of punishing the governor for attacking foreign merchants, he supported the action. This decision would soon lead to one of the most destructive wars of the medieval world. When Genghis Khan learned what had happened, he did not immediately declare war. Instead, he sent 3 diplomatic envoys to demand justice for the murdered merchants. The Mongol ruler hoped the situation could still be resolved peacefully. Shah Muhammad II made a critical mistake in responding to the Mongol demands. One of the envoys was executed, and the others were humiliated by having their beards shaved before being sent back. For the Mongols, this was a deep insult and a clear act of hostility. After hearing of the treatment of his envoys, Genghis Khan prepared for war. What had begun as a peaceful trade mission would soon turn into a massive military campaign that would destroy the Khwarezmian Empire. In 1219, Genghis Khan launched his invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire. The Mongol army was highly disciplined, fast, and organized. Their strategy relied on speed, intelligence gathering, and coordination between different units. Rather than attacking from a single direction, the Mongols divided their forces into multiple armies. Each army moved along different routes, confusing their enemies and preventing the Khwarezmian forces from concentrating their defenses. The first major objective was the city of Otrar, where the caravan had originally been attacked. Mongol forces surrounded the city and began a long and determined siege. The defenders attempted to hold out behind the city walls. For months, the siege continued as the Mongols slowly weakened the city's defenses. Eventually, the city fell to the invading forces. The governor responsible for the caravan's destruction was captured by the Mongols. His punishment became one of the most famous stories connected to the Mongol campaign. According to historical accounts, he was executed as punishment for his role in the killing of the merchants. The fall of Otrar marked the beginning of the empire's collapse. After capturing Otrar, Mongol armies advanced deeper into Central Asia. Major cities began preparing for war as the Mongol forces moved rapidly across the region. One of the next targets was the famous Silk Road city of Bukhara. The city had strong defenses, but the Mongols used siege tactics and careful planning to overcome them. When Bukhara fell, it shocked the surrounding regions. Many cities believed their walls would protect them from nomadic armies, but the Mongols proved they were capable of complex military operations. With each victory, the Mongols gained more territory and more supplies. The invasion was quickly turning into one of the most successful campaigns in Genghis Khan's career. As Mongol forces continued their campaign, they moved toward another major city of Central Asia, Samarkand. This city was one of the largest and wealthiest in the region and served as an important center of the Khwarezmian Empire. Samarkand had a large army defending it, including soldiers from different parts of the empire. The city's rulers believed they could resist the Mongol attack behind their massive walls. However, the Mongols used a combination of siege warfare and psychological tactics to weaken the defenders. Some defenders surrendered, while others lost morale as Mongol forces continued their relentless assault. Eventually, the city fell to the Mongol army. The loss of Samarkand dealt a devastating blow to the Khwarezmian Empire and showed that even its strongest cities were vulnerable. Meanwhile, Shah Muhammad II began fleeing westward across his empire. Rather than organizing a united defense, he abandoned many of his cities as the Mongols advanced. This lack of leadership made it easier for the Mongols to capture territory. Without a coordinated army to oppose them, the Mongol forces continued sweeping across Central Asia. The fleeing ruler eventually reached lands near the Caspian Sea while trying to escape Mongol pursuit. By this time, most of his empire had already fallen into Mongol hands. Shah Muhammad II eventually died while in hiding. His death effectively ended the power of the Khwarezmian Empire and left the Mongols in control of vast territories. By the end of the campaign, Genghis Khan had expanded his empire dramatically. The destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire opened the door for future Mongol campaigns into the Middle East and even toward Europe. After the destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire, the empire of Genghis Khan had grown larger than anyone could have imagined only a few decades earlier. Vast territories stretching across Central Asia now answered to the Mongol ruler. But the campaigns of the Mongols did not stop with the fall of one empire. Instead, the Mongol leadership saw an opportunity to explore and test the strength of lands far beyond the borders they had already conquered. Rather than leading every campaign himself, Genghis Khan relied on trusted generals to carry out missions across distant territories. Two of the most talented commanders in the Mongol army were Subutai and Jebe. Both men had earned their reputations through years of warfare, proving themselves as brilliant strategists who could lead armies across enormous distances while maintaining discipline and speed. These two generals were given an extraordinary task. They were ordered to lead a powerful Mongol force westward into lands that the Mongols knew very little about. Their mission was not simply conquest, but also exploration and intelligence gathering. They would test the strength of distant kingdoms, study the terrain, and learn about the armies that lived far beyond the familiar steppe. As the Mongol army began its journey westward, it crossed rugged mountains, wide deserts, and vast plains. The soldiers traveled mostly on horseback, often covering distances that other armies would have considered impossible. Mongol warriors carried multiple horses, allowing them to switch mounts and maintain incredible speed during long journeys. The discipline of the Mongol army made these long campaigns possible. Every soldier followed strict orders, and communication between different units was carefully organized. Messengers rode between commanders, delivering information quickly across large distances so that the army could move with coordination and precision. Along the way, Mongol scouts constantly rode ahead of the main army. Their job was to gather information about the land and the people who lived there. They observed cities, studied possible battlefields, and reported any signs of enemy forces preparing for war. This intelligence allowed the Mongol commanders to make careful plans before entering unfamiliar regions. Instead of rushing blindly into battle, they preferred to understand their enemies and strike at moments when victory was most likely. As the Mongol army continued traveling west, they began approaching the mountainous region known as the Caucasus. This area stood between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea and had long acted as a barrier separating different civilizations and cultures. For many empires in the past, the Caucasus Mountains had been extremely difficult to cross. But the Mongols were not easily stopped by geography. Their determination and mobility allowed them to push forward into regions that had rarely seen armies from the distant Mongolian steppe. As the Mongol forces entered the Caucasus region, they encountered a complex landscape filled with different kingdoms, tribes, and alliances. The mountains and valleys were home to many cultures that had developed their own ways of life over centuries. Some of the first major powers to encounter the Mongols were the armies of Georgia and Armenia. These kingdoms had strong military traditions and experienced soldiers who were familiar with defending mountainous terrain. At first, the rulers of these regions attempted to resist the Mongol advance. Armies gathered to block important passes and defend key cities. Many believed that the difficult terrain would slow the Mongols and give the defenders an advantage. However, the Mongol generals quickly demonstrated their ability to adapt to unfamiliar environments. Instead of attacking heavily defended positions directly, they used scouting and maneuvering to find weaker points in enemy defenses. In some cases, the Mongols avoided major battles altogether by moving around enemy armies and striking at less protected areas. This forced defenders to chase the Mongols across difficult terrain, often leaving their own strong positions behind. Another powerful weapon used by the Mongols was psychological warfare. Rumors of their previous victories spread quickly through the region. Stories about cities falling and armies being defeated created fear among many communities that had never faced the Mongols before. As the campaign continued, the Mongol generals began moving north toward the vast steppe lands beyond the mountains. These grasslands stretched across enormous distances and were home to powerful nomadic groups. One of the most important of these groups was the Cumans, a confederation of skilled horse warriors who controlled large areas of the steppe north of the Black Sea. The Cumans were experienced fighters and understood steppe warfare better than most settled armies. Because of this, they initially believed they could resist the Mongol invasion on the open plains, where cavalry battles often took place. As the Mongols entered the lands of the Cumans, conflict quickly followed. Both sides relied heavily on cavalry and mounted archery, making the battles fast and unpredictable across the wide open steppe. At first, the Cumans attempted to resist the Mongol advance through direct battle. Their warriors were known for their skill with bows and their ability to move quickly across the plains. However, the Mongols had perfected many of the same tactics and often executed them with greater coordination. One of the most famous strategies used by the Mongols during these campaigns was the feigned retreat. In this tactic, Mongol soldiers pretended to flee from battle, encouraging their enemies to chase them across long distances. When their opponents became disorganized during the pursuit, Mongol forces would suddenly turn around and launch a powerful counterattack. This tactic had already defeated many armies across Asia, and it proved effective once again. Facing growing pressure from the Mongol army, many Cuman leaders decided to seek help from neighboring powers. Some of them fled westward and appealed to the princes of the Rus territories for military support. The rulers of these lands, which included cities across Eastern Europe, agreed to form a coalition with the Cumans in order to resist the Mongol threat. Together they gathered an army to confront the invaders. The two sides eventually prepared to meet near the Kalka River. The approaching battle would become one of the first major encounters between Mongol forces and European armies. When the battle began, the Mongols once again used their famous retreat tactic to lure the Allied forces into a long pursuit across the steppe. The Rus and Cuman soldiers chased the Mongols for days, believing the enemy was fleeing in fear. But once the Allied army became stretched out and disorganized, the Mongols suddenly turned and attacked with devastating force. The battle that followed became known as the Battle of the Kalka River. The Mongols won a decisive victory, defeating the combined army and demonstrating that even distant European forces were vulnerable to their tactics. Though the Mongols soon returned eastward after the campaign, the knowledge they gained would later guide even larger invasions into Europe. By the early 1220s, the empire created by Genghis Khan had grown into the largest continuous land empire the world had ever seen. From the steppes of Mongolia to the cities of Central Asia, vast territories now answered to Mongol rule. But even after decades of war and conquest, the Mongol leader was not finished expanding his power. New campaigns were already being planned against enemies who still resisted Mongol authority. One of the major regions that remained outside Mongol control was the Kingdom of the Western Sia. This kingdom had previously submitted to Mongol power, but over time, tensions between the Mongols and the Western Sia rulers began to grow. When Genghis Khan demanded military support for his campaigns, the Tangut leadership refused, which the Mongols considered a serious act of defiance. For Genghis Khan, loyalty and obedience were essential to maintaining the unity of his empire. Any kingdom that broke its promises or refused to support Mongol campaigns risked facing severe consequences. Because of this, the refusal of Western Sia to fully cooperate with the Mongols could not be ignored. Preparations for a new campaign soon began. Despite his age, Genghis Khan personally prepared to lead the invasion against the Tangut kingdom. Mongol armies gathered once again, ready to march across deserts and mountains toward the fortified cities of Western Sia. The Mongols had already proven their ability to defeat powerful empires, but this campaign would present new challenges. Western Sia possessed strong defensive cities, experienced soldiers, and knowledge of the difficult terrain surrounding their lands. Still, the Mongols had learned many lessons during their earlier wars. Their commanders had gained experience in siege warfare, allowing them to attack fortified cities that once seemed impossible to capture. As the Mongol army advanced toward the territory of Western Sia, towns and fortresses began preparing for the coming invasion. News of the Mongol approach spread quickly, creating fear among many communities that remembered the destruction the Mongols had caused in earlier campaigns. Yet Genghis Khan was not simply interested in destruction. His goal was to bring the region firmly under Mongol authority so that it would never again threaten the stability of his empire. The campaign that followed would become the final military expedition of Genghis Khan's life, marking the closing chapter of one of the most extraordinary careers in world history. As the Mongol invasion of Western Sia began, the armies of Genghis Khan moved with the same speed and discipline that had defined their earlier campaigns. Cavalry units spread across the countryside, capturing smaller settlements and cutting off communication between cities. The Mongols understood that isolating major cities would weaken the ability of Western Sia to organize a united defense. By controlling the surrounding countryside, they prevented reinforcements and supplies from reaching important fortresses. The Tangut defenders fought fiercely, attempting to resist the Mongol advance wherever possible. Their soldiers were familiar with the deserts and mountain passes of the region, which sometimes slowed the Mongol forces. However, Mongol commanders had become highly skilled in adapting to different environments. Years of campaigning across Asia had taught them how to fight in deserts, mountains, and heavily fortified regions. One of the most important advantages the Mongols possessed was their ability to coordinate multiple armies at once. Different divisions attacked separate targets, forcing the defenders to spread their forces thin across a wide area. As the campaign continued, Mongol forces began laying siege to major cities throughout the kingdom. Siege engines, captured engineers, and new tactics allowed them to attack walls that had once protected Western Xia for generations. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan continued directing the campaign while traveling with the army. Even in his later years, he remained deeply involved in military planning and strategy. His presence among the troops helped maintain morale. Mongol soldiers saw their leader not only as a ruler, but also as the warrior who had united the tribes and led them to victory again and again. Despite determined resistance from Western Xia, the Mongol campaign continued pushing deeper into the kingdom, bringing the Tangut state closer to collapse. The struggle would soon reach its final stage as the Mongols surrounded some of the most important cities in the region. As the war against Western Xia continued, the Mongol armies tightened their grip on the remaining Tangut strongholds. Cities that had once felt secure behind their walls now found themselves surrounded by Mongol forces and cut off from help. During this time, Genghis Khan was still traveling with his army, overseeing the campaign and ensuring that his commanders followed his strategic plans. However, his long life of warfare had begun to take a toll on his health. Historical sources differ about exactly what happened during these final months. Some accounts suggest that Genghis Khan became ill during the campaign, while others describe injuries suffered while traveling or hunting. Whatever the exact cause, it became clear that the great conqueror was approaching the end of his life. Even so, the Mongol campaign continued moving forward as the army pressed its advantage against Western Xia. Eventually, the Tangut kingdom could no longer hold out against the Mongol assault. The power of Western Xia began collapsing as its cities fell one after another to the advancing Mongol armies. In 1227, during the final stages of the campaign, Genghis Khan died while still on campaign against Western Xia. His death marked the end of an era that had transformed the history of Asia and much of the world. The Mongols kept news of his death secret for a time in order to prevent enemies from taking advantage of the situation. This secrecy allowed the army to complete its campaign against Western Xia without disruption. After the conquest was finished, preparations were made for the burial of the Mongol ruler. According to tradition, the exact location of Genghis Khan's tomb was kept hidden, and it remains one of history's great mysteries. Although Genghis Khan had died, the empire he created did not disappear. Instead, it would continue expanding under his sons and grandsons, eventually becoming the largest land empire in world history. The legacy of Genghis Khan would shape the future of Asia, Europe, and the Middle East for generations to come, ensuring that his name would remain one of the most famous in all of world history. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, during the final stages of the Mongol campaign against the Western Xia, the Mongol Empire faced a major turning point. The leader who had united the tribes of the steppe and led them to victory across Asia was gone. Yet the empire he created was vast, powerful, and filled with experienced commanders who had spent years fighting under his leadership. Before his death, Genghis Khan had carefully prepared for the future of his empire. One of the most important decisions he made was naming a successor who could rule after him. Although he had several sons, he chose his third son, Ögedei Khan, to become the next great Khan of the Mongol Empire. This decision was not made lightly. Genghis Khan believed Ögedei possessed the temperament needed to govern a massive empire that included many different cultures, languages, and religions. While other sons were strong military leaders, Ögedei was known for his ability to work with advisors and maintain unity among the Mongol nobility. After Genghis Khan's death, Mongol leaders gathered to hold a Kurultai, a traditional council where important decisions were made. During this gathering, the nobles confirmed Ögedei as the new Great Khan. With this decision, leadership of the empire officially passed to the next generation of the Mongol ruling family. Despite the death of their founder, the Mongol armies did not stop their campaigns. The empire still possessed one of the most effective military systems in the world, built on discipline, mobility, and careful organization. Generals who had fought alongside Genghis Khan continued leading armies across different regions. Under Ögedei's leadership, the Mongol Empire began organizing its territories more formally. Roads were improved to connect distant regions of the empire, making travel and communication faster. These routes allowed messengers to carry orders across enormous distances. One of the most important systems expanded during this time was the Yam, a network of relay stations where messengers could change horses and continue traveling quickly. This system allowed information to move rapidly across thousands of miles of territory. These improvements helped transform the Mongol Empire from a loose collection of conquered lands into a more structured and connected state. Administration, taxation, and communication all became more organized under Ögedei's rule. Although the empire was still expanding, these new systems ensured that Mongol leaders could maintain control over lands stretching from East Asia to the edges of Europe. While Ögedei Khan worked to strengthen the administration of the empire, Mongol generals continued launching major military campaigns. Many of these campaigns pushed farther west than the Mongols had ever gone before. One of the most important commanders involved in these campaigns was Subutai, one of the greatest military strategists in Mongol history. Subutai had served under Genghis Khan for many years and had already led expeditions across Central Asia and Eastern Europe. Under Ögedei's orders, massive Mongol armies were assembled to invade new territories in Europe. These forces included warriors from many different parts of the Mongol Empire, all united under experienced commanders. The Mongol armies moved westward through the lands of the Rus principalities. These territories were ruled by different princes who often competed with one another rather than working together. Because of this lack of unity, Mongol forces were able to defeat several Rus' armies individually. One of the most devastating events of this campaign was the destruction of the city of Kiev. The fall of Kiev in 1240 shocked much of Eastern Europe. The city had been one of the most important centers of power and culture in the region. Its destruction demonstrated the overwhelming strength of the Mongol war machine. After conquering the Rus' territories, the Mongol armies continued pushing westward toward the heart of Europe. Their campaigns soon reached the kingdoms of Poland and Hungary. European rulers began preparing for the arrival of the Mongols, gathering armies to resist the invasion. However, many of these armies had little experience fighting against the fast-moving cavalry tactics used by the Mongols. The coming battles would determine whether the Mongol Empire would continue expanding deeper into Europe or face its first major defeat. In 1241, Mongol armies launched major attacks against European forces. Two of the most important battles of this campaign took place in Central Europe. One battle occurred in Poland, where Mongol forces confronted European armies near the town of Legnica. This conflict became known as the Battle of Legnica. During the battle, Mongol cavalry used many of the tactics that had already defeated armies across Asia. They used speed, coordinated attacks, and feigned retreats to confuse their opponents. Although the European forces fought bravely, the Mongols ultimately defeated them. The victory allowed the Mongol army to continue advancing deeper into Central Europe. At the same time, another Mongol army invaded Hungary, where they faced the forces of King Bela IV of Hungary. The two sides met in a major conflict known as the Battle of Mohi. This battle became one of the most important clashes of the Mongol invasion of Europe. Once again, Mongol tactics proved extremely effective. Their coordinated attacks and superior mobility allowed them to break the Hungarian defenses after intense fighting. Following the battle, Mongol forces spread across Hungary, devastating much of the countryside. Many European rulers feared that the Mongols might soon conquer the entire continent. However, an unexpected event soon changed the course of the invasion. In 1241, news reached the Mongol commanders that Ögedei Khan had died. Because Mongol tradition required leading nobles to return east to choose a new great Khan, many commanders began withdrawing their armies from Europe. This sudden withdrawal saved much of Europe from further Mongol conquest. Even so, the Mongol Empire remained one of the most powerful forces in the world. and its influence would continue shaping history for generations. By the late 1220s, Genghis Khan had already built the largest, contiguous empire the world had ever seen. His armies had crushed kingdoms from the plains of Mongolia to the deserts of Central Asia. But even in his later years, the great conqueror refused to slow down. Instead of resting and ruling peacefully, he continued leading campaigns across Asia. One of his final major conflicts was against the Western Shia, a kingdom that had once submitted to Mongol rule but later resisted paying tribute. To Genghis Khan, rebellion was something that had to be crushed completely. The Mongol army moved quickly across the harsh deserts and mountains, surrounding the lands of the Western Shia. As always, their tactics relied on speed, deception, and discipline. Cities that resisted were surrounded, cut off from supplies, and eventually destroyed. The Mongols used psychological warfare as much as physical force. News of their earlier victories spread ahead of them, causing fear in many towns before the Mongol soldiers even arrived. Even though he was already an older man by this time, Genghis Khan still rode with his army. According to many historical accounts, he remained a commanding presence on the battlefield. His generals followed his strategies closely, and the soldiers believed their leader was almost unstoppable. His reputation alone made enemies hesitate before challenging him. However, this campaign would become different from all the others. During the fighting against the Western Xia, something happened that would soon change the course of history. While the Mongols were winning battles and capturing cities, their leader's health began to fail. The man who had united the Mongol tribes and conquered half of Asia was reaching the end of his life. Despite his worsening condition, the campaign continued. The Mongols pressed forward, determined to finish the war. Their leader had built a system where the army could operate efficiently even if he was not personally commanding every moment. Still, the thought of losing the man who created their empire weighed heavily on many of the generals who had followed him for decades.